Sounds
Hey,
good.
Michelle, we're going live right now. Who do you want to do a shout out to?
I'm going to do a shout out to my cat, Zoe, because she'll probably make a special guest appearance at some point during this interview.
All right, Zoe, here we go. Hey guys, apparently, I was talking with Michelle about this earlier. Mercury retrograde is going to be a thing today. So we're welcoming Michelle Shea Walker to the show. We're going to be talking all things tarot. We're going to talk all things oracle. We're going to talk about being psychic, and we're going to talk about the 90s a lot. So, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, we've already cut out a few times. So guys, if I'm not here and she's here, it's her show. And if she's not here, it's still funny
I'm
way of
taking
looking. We're
over.
gonna make it roll. Yeah, she's taking over. So
Oh, looks like we're going to start right away with the cutout with Michael. So until he gets back, I'm going to talk about Mercury retrograde. You're back. All right.
that was
Nope,
good.
that was a teaser.
Oh my God, again.
No, you're
Oh,
good. You're here.
oh, good. I like that. That was a really good teaser too. So let's talk about the difference between tarot cards and oracle cards because they look the same but they're different.
They are different. So tarot, when you say tarot cards, it means a specific type of cards, and they have a long history, and they have different suits and different, basically it's major and minor arcana whenever you're talking about tarot. So when we talk about tarot card readings, most people will think of the death card or the lover's card or the chariot or the wheel of fortune. And those are the major arcana of the tarot. So usually when we think of card readings, that's what people default to. They default to thinking of tarot cards. And as a reader, personally, I feel like the tarot cards tell a broader story, a longer story. So they are usually what I will use for the bulk of a reading. But oracle cards are kind of more of a recent creation in that they are specific topics or ideas or concepts or emotions. It really kind of runs the gamut. They're pretty much any card that deviates from that major and minor arcana sort of scenario. And so through that, you can kind of clarify what's happening with the tarot cards, or you can use oracle decks on their own as well.
And when you say arcana, what do you
Yeah.
mean? What does arcana
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely. I can tell you that. I'll grab my recent favorite deck, which is the Modern Witch Tarot. I did not create this one, but I do love it, and it plays very well with the cards that I've created. So traditional tarot actually started being played as on like poker decks, like playing card decks. So you can actually do a tarot card reading with one of those if you know that history. And the minor arcana is just the selection of cards that would exist within a traditional poker deck. So in tarot we have pentacles, cups, swords, and wands. And in a poker deck you have diamonds, hearts,
Clubs and
spades, and
spades.
clubs. And so
Yeah.
the clubs are the wands, and it's the same energy as the wands. And so all of the cards in the minor arcana have like every one of those suits has 10 cards, just like every one of those suits out 10 cards and a court. So king, queen, jack, ace in the poker deck, and in the tarot deck, it's usually a page, knight, king, queen. So basically, we're taking all of those cards, and those exist within the tarot in just different forms.
Oh wow. So
And
you could play poker with tarot cards.
I guess you could. Yeah, I've never tried to like invert it, but yeah, I think it's easier for people that know about tarot to translate the poker into the tarot than it would
Yeah.
be for people who don't know about poker to like try and translate what they're doing there. And of course, as tarot has been developed, it's gotten a lot more symbolism and stuff like that. So like actual tarot cards, you're going to have a lot more to go off of than if you were playing with a poker deck. But if you
Right.
know the basic meanings behind each one of the cards, you can in theory. And I have used a poker deck at like parties when someone wants a reading. I'm like, cool, do you have a card? Do you have some playing cards? And basically, so the arcana are basically just separating those two, where you have the ones that you think of with the lovers and the devil and all of those being the major arcana, and then the poker card based cards being the minor arcana. And the
Got it.
main difference between these for a reader is that the minor arcana basically symbolize that you have a lot of weight in the situation. Like you can kind of affect the situation a lot because it's kind of more like our earthly decisions are affecting that reading. Whereas if you have a lot of major arcana cards showing up, the Lovers, the Devil, those have a lot of fate behind them. So it kind of depends on how much of a control freak you are as to like which one of these is like a good or bad thing. I always love it when a lot of major arcana cards show up in a reading because it means that someone's destined for what's about to happen. So it feels very exciting. It feels very big. Whereas if it's minor arcana, like you can affect that. Your free will has a lot more like pull in that situation. And so
Okay.
like if you don't like a reading whenever it's got a lot of minor arcana cards in it, I always like to think of the tarot as like a coaching technique. So like we do the reading and then I discuss with my clients like, well, how do you feel about that? Like, is this what you want the outcome to be? And if not, like we need to go back and we need to look at your energy and your intentions so that you can affect the reading, because the reading is never set in stone. But when there are a lot of major arcana cards, it's a little more solid than the ones that are minor arcana cards.
Okay, so here's a question I've always
Yeah.
had, and that is if you were to have one reading and then 20 minutes later have another reading,
Hmm.
how are those readings going to be the same, or what's the difference there?
I have lots of answers to that. So the first thing that I would say is it depends on if you're having it with the same reader. And this is something that I'm always talking about with people and on my followers and fans of tarot in general, is that the reader that you select does a lot for your reading. So like I think a lot of times people are just like, oh, I just want to have my fortune told and I'm just going to go like wherever the next person that I see. And so the more that you can select someone that has a similar energy and intention about life to you, or at least has an outlook on life that you respect and you enjoy, that's going to really affect the way it's kind of like choosing a therapist. Like you don't want to go to a therapist that isn't, kind of in alignment with your values and your minds. I mean, you want someone that can kind of like affect the way that you see the world in a positive way, but like you don't want to go to someone that has a completely different belief about life than you do. And it's the same thing with the tarot reader. So like if you were going to go to one tarot reader within 20 minutes and then another tarot reader within 20 minutes, those might be completely different readings, even though they're reading the exact same energy, because that person is interpreting the cards through their scope and their lens. So I always lean towards self-growth and positive energy and what can we do to improve a situation, or what can we do to make the most of even the most challenging situation. Whereas there are some readers that will like completely give you a negative reading for the same cards that I'm telling you are an exciting opportunity for growth, because that's the way that they view the world. They view the world as something that's like you're stuck within the situation and like you're cursed, and that's another whole other story. You never want to go to
That
a reader that says that you're cursed because they're just trying to get more money out of you.
now I've seen readings or seen readings where like
Hmm.
I know the one of the cards is the Fool or the
Hmm.
something like that,
Yeah.
and sometimes I've heard that as a negative kind of thing, or sometimes it's positive.
And there are a
How,
couple things going on there. One is the reader's scope, and then the other is I'm going to talk about three things. There's the reader's scope. So what I just talked about, the person's perspective that's doing the reading. There's the cards that are around the cards. So like a lot of times we like to think, when you don't know a lot about tarot, myself included, you like to think of each card as just having this specific set meaning. And that makes it really easy to just pull out cards and like try and figure out what the story is. But like, just like any story, the surrounding circumstance do a lot for how that's going to play out.
I think that makes
So,
a lot of sense because most
right?
people go like, well, I pulled out the Fool, I pulled out Death, and I pulled out this Swan thing, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna die tomorrow.
Yeah. So the reading is you could pull out those same cards. And then the third thing that's going to affect it is depending on if you have a reader that's like just traditional, complete, straightforward translation of the cards versus an intuitive reader, because there are intuitive readers that, and I mean, both have their place. I've gone to plenty of people that don't consider themselves intuitives that give me a great straightforward reading of the cards. And it's exactly what I needed to hear, because I didn't need any other bells and whistles. I just needed like
Yeah.
straightforward. Whereas the intuitive readers, sometimes an intuitive reader will give you a completely different definition of a card because they're reading into the energy. So that's why this the Modern Witch Tarot that I was talking about has a basis in what's known as, and I'm gonna mess up the way this is pronounced, but Rider White, I think is what it is. And it's
Uh-huh.
basically the traditional tarot art that we think of that's been around for forever. So anything that just looks like super like a tarot card. Like I mean there are tarot cards on the world that like look like they have, animals instead of people, and they, nowadays we have all kinds of different versions of tarot, but the Rider Waite is definitely like what you would think of if you were like, I'm going to go back to the Middle Ages and I'm going to like
Right.
look at what a tarot card looked like. That's what this is. And those have so much symbolism in every single one of the images that a lot of readers, like a reader could look at this card, and if it's an intuitive reader, like the Six of Cups is about nostalgia and home and childhood, but a reader might zoom in and be like, oh, that looks like mint chocolate chip ice cream to me. And in my reference in childhood, mint chocolate chip ice cream is connected more to my father than my mother. So this is a nostalgia card that's about your father. So it really just depends on, and for an intuitive, it depends on what's jumping out at them. And that's kind of hard to explain because a lot of us don't, we're all intuitive, first of all. No one's like special for being intuitive. It's just that people that are practiced intuitives are more in tune with that energy. And so if we all learn to kind of listen to those little voice impulses, like when you're like, oh, I have this song in my head all of a sudden, I wonder what that's about. Or, oh, that part of that image really like jumped out at me and reminded me of something from my childhood that has nothing to do with this at all. Those are usually your intuition trying to tell you something. And
I
so,
think you're
yeah,
hitting on something that's really cool. I talked about this with my team, specifically with Caden this morning,
yeah,
and we talked about the fact that the reader is the one that's interpreting or intuiting the cards more so than just the face of the card itself.
absolutely. That's absolutely what it is. And again, that's why it's so important to resonate with the reader that you pick, because you really want them to be interpreting something that feels like it would be how it would be how you would interpret it if you were intuitive, or a better version of how you would interpret it if you were an intuitive, because it's just like
Exactly.
asking for people for advice. Like, and that's also the concept that I have about decks. Like I have multiple versions of tarot decks, even though they all have the same suits and the same cards in them, because it's kind of like going to a different friend for the different kind of
Mhm.
advice that you want. And the same thing for a reader. It's like you wouldn't go to your, if you need to be like coddled, you're not going to go to your no bullshit friend that's going to like tell it to you straight and like tell you to grow up, and like who to go to talk about certain topics. And the same thing happens with both card decks and readers. Like you need to select based on what you're looking for that advice.
Okay, that is actually pretty awesome because I see on TikTok and on Instagram on different social media channels, people just saying, come get a reading and it's cost whatever it does,
Mhm.
and that's how it works. And I think that's what most people do. They just choose. They're not picky about their reader. So
Yeah.
how do you
And
decide?
I mean, honestly, it's great now because with social media, you can follow a reader and get a sense for their vibe. Whereas, like, I mean, in the days that I started going to tarot readings, I was literally just going to like state fairs or like whatever had a neon sign in the window that I could like go in and get a reading from. And you don't know anything about those people. And so
Correct.
now it's great because you can get a sense for the person's personality and the way that they view things by following them online. And if they offer readings for the masses, like you can kind of get a feel for their interpretation of the cards. That's actually a really great advice. If someone does offer online readings that are kind of for the general collective, as I like to call it, step in for some of those. Like, if they have like a pick a card, like do one of their pick a cards and like see if their interpretation, what the new age community says, resonates for you, which means a couple things. It means, does it sound like it's talking about a situation that feels familiar to you? And also, does it sound like advice that you want to take? Because if someone's giving the advice that's not within your vibration and doesn't resonate, then it's going to be the stuff that like doesn't sound like something that you would do or that you would want to do.
How do you know if that person really is for you though? And I want to get
Mhm.
onto the oracle cards too, but just
Yeah.
how do you know if that person actually is going to resonate with you if you've never worked with them before?
I mean, like I said, like a social media is great because people aren't charging for a lot of the readings that they're doing, or at least like preliminary readings. People won't
Gotcha.
necessarily do like a huge, but like for instance, I have a Patreon where I do like pick a cards and I do monthly tarot scopes. So it's a smaller charge than actually working with me. And I also do new and full moon videos online where I put the first half of that video on my Instagram and on my YouTube and on my Facebook sometimes. And so those are great ones because like you just stumble across my social media and watch the video. And like if you're
Gotcha.
watching the video and something kind of like clicks and you're like, "Oh, that sounded familiar, that sounded like me," or I really like the way that this person like views the world. Like I said, it's very similar to picking a therapist. So it's like
Gotcha.
sometimes I feel like a lot of therapists I've been to, you'll usually have like one session that's like free or discounted or something like that to kind of like feel things out with that person. And like, very clearly at the end of that session whether or not you want to work with that person.
That's a good
And
point. Good
so
point.
that's what these free readings online are about for a lot of readers. It's like, hey, this is my vibe. And I'm the first person to say, like, if you don't like optimism, I am not your reader. If you don't want to look, if you want to wallow in like if you're in a wallowing place and you don't want to weigh out and you don't want to look at the brighter side of things, you do not want to come to me for a reading because that is what I'm going to give you. If you want
Gotcha.
someone that's going to like kind of sit in it with you and like get real dark, like there's a reader out there for you, but it's not me.
Gotcha. I want to
Yeah,
ask you a couple more things because this is absolutely fascinating to me.
I'm glad.
Um, we're talking about tarot. Now,
Hmm.
there's the Oracle decks, and I know you've created your own.
I
Tell us
have.
what's the difference between tarot and
Mhm.
Oracle, and why use one versus the other?
Got it. Okay. So, like I said before, the tarot usually tells like a broader story.
Hmm.
So, when I'm doing a full reading for someone, tarot is always going to be involved because I don't get quite as much information from the oracle cards because oracle cards tend to be stripped down and simpler. So, as we were talking about with tarot, we have all of this stuff you can pick up on this imagery. Like you could like be like, oh, yellow house reminds me of something. Whatever this person's holding, that hat reminds me of something. So like there's so much in a tarot image that a reader can not only know the meaning of the card, but also pick up on little details for intuitive messages because there's never any accident as to what cards fall. And it's never any accident as to what cards fall for that particular reader.
Hmm.
So again, it all has like, you have to have faith in the universe to believe in the laws of synchronicity, even though that is like a scientific sidebar. And so in order to do that, you have to trust that like that particular reader saw whatever they saw on that card because you needed that message. Whereas Oracle decks, let me grab one that's not mine first.
We're totally
Uh,
going to talk about that scientific part too. I just
yes,
love that the quantum is coming into the spiritual, and that needs to
absolutely.
happen.
I know. I mean, it's always happened. We're just recognizing that connection now. But Oracle decks can range from anything from words. So this is a card from my friend Gabrielle Rosie's deck, and it's just everything I imagine is real. It's just a bunch of affirmations. And so when you pull those cards, they're kind of like a little bit of advice. So oracle cards are really good for like single card readings. If you're doing your own readings and you just want like a little hit advice, then you can pull an oracle card and you can get an affirmation, or you can get a spirit animal. This is one from the Wild Unknown. It has a spirit animal deck, and it comes with a book that tells you all about each spirit animal. So you can kind of get a sense of one card readings. And then there are some that are just like words and feelings. So this one's called the Vessel Oracle deck, and it's just a single word, movement. So there's a lot more room for interpretation for the stripped down, simplified Oracle decks. And so that's kind of when you're trusting your intuition a little bit more.
Are the Oracle decks more for people who want to do readings for themselves as opposed to going to someone else?
No, I mean, so usually if you go to a reader to get a card reading, they're by default at least going to use the tarot deck. I don't know a lot of readers that just exclusively work with oracle cards because, again, there is a bigger story with the tarot cards. But a lot of tarot card readers will use oracle decks to support what's happening in the cards. So there's a
Uh,
lot of times a reader will do something where they need to clarify a card. So, like, you'll do a spread And there'll just be something that, whatever your intuition's feeling blocked that day, or the story's more complex than you thought it was going to be. And maybe you're not picking up on a message from the card. And so you're like, I don't really know what this card is supposed to mean, because it doesn't make sense with the rest of the story. Because again, the whole thing's about how everything plays out together. And so then you would either pull more tarot cards, or sometimes if you're just like, I just want a little clarification, you would pull like an oracle card, like the word card, and be like, okay, now I know that it's movement and the 6 of Cups. So you're moving to some place that feels familiar to you, or, like whatever the interpretation of the energy and the actual spread is. And so oracle cards are a great intro into card reading if you're not versed in tarot. So as far
Gotcha.
as the individual goes, I mean, it can go both ways. If you want to do the learning of the meanings behind the cards and the symbolism behind the cards for tarot, great. If you're just like, I just want a card to tell me what to do, oracle cards are good for that. And there are card decks that are literally just so minimalist that it's just like a yes or no card, or like there's just like something where you just like shuffle up a deck and you get different versions of yes or no the whole time. So it's kind of more like that, like magic 8-ball feeling.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
this is where I love wanting to talk with you here. You have done your own deck of oracle cards,
I have.
and they are all 90s based,
They
right?
are. They are.
So yeah,
So
let's
the
talk about 90s and oracle.
Total Betty Goddess deck is my oracle deck. This is the first edition, which I have limited copies left. They're available on my website, and they are 90s icons playing the goddesses. And basically, what that means is that I've taken these really traditional, there's a lot of very beautiful goddess decks out there on the market, but they feel like something that your like crunchy hippie aunt would own, which is, there's nothing wrong with that aesthetic, but it feels very sort of like the old school, like kooky, quirky, new age person in like an 80s or 90s movie would have like a whole lineup of these like type of goddess decks on the shelf. And so
When you
they're
say goddess
very,
decks, what do you mean?
yes,
What is a
deck
goddess deck?
oracle decks, or they are an oracle deck, but they deal with the goddesses. So every single one of the cards is a different goddess. So rather than having a word or having a phrase or having an affirmation, we have a different goddess on the cards. And traditionally, they would be images that kind of look like something maybe out of like Renaissance art or like Art Deco. And they're very beautiful images. And they've got like these very pretty, like pastel colors. But I kept looking for a goddess deck that felt like me, because again, every deck feels like it's a different friend that you're talking to and asking for advice. And none of the decks on the market felt like someone that I would have as my friend.
Like who are the
They
who are the
weren't,
goddesses you're
yeah,
talking about? I guess who are the
yes.
specific goddesses?
So, I mean, it just depends on the deck, really. But sometimes they're just all Greek goddesses. Sometimes there are certain goddesses that are pretty well used in the new age community. And so, like Venus is the Roman goddess of love and beauty. So like there's a lot of people, especially on Instagram and TikTok, that talk
Okay,
about Venus Day is when you're supposed to do like your self-care and your beautifying rituals, and like all of the goddesses, just like in Greek mythology, rule over some certain aspects of life.
got it.
Yeah. So
Got it.
basically, we're taking these goddesses, and I decided that I wanted them to feel more modern, more colorful. I always I like to think of my aesthetic as like if someone took like a child or teenage bedroom and just like spray painted adult graffiti all over it. Like it's like taking something very colorful and bright and sort of feeling innocent, but making it adult. And so I was like, I'm going to take all of the things, all of the female imagery from when I was growing up that I aspired to be like, and I'm going to let them play the goddesses. And so I took people like Alanis Morissette is my Venus. And so she is the one that is in charge of love and beauty. But also like she makes Venus a little more edgy, because like Alanis Morissette's songs are all about love, but they're not necessarily all about love in like a happy, like bright way. And so this kind of brings in the energy of like, love also deals with heartbreak, and love also deals with self-love, and love also deals with all the aspects of sensuality and sexuality.
Got
So
it.
so yeah, so basically I'm just taking images of and I intuitively paired them. I really let it kind of be a process where I turned my mind off a little bit, and I made like a selection of people that I wanted to have in the deck. And then I like started looking through the goddesses that I wanted to have in the deck, and I kind of let them match themselves up, which is something that's just intuitive speak. Like it's hard to explain. It's just that gut feeling of like, oh, these two go together. And then as I was writing the guidebook that goes with it, which is actually a coloring book as well, I was able to start to clarify what the definitions of these cards were and why I wanted these goddesses to play them. Because as I wrote the guidebook, it's definitely not an extensive background research on any of these goddesses. I even say in the intro, I'm like, this is a jumping off point for you. If you're like a real nerd for like the history and the mythology and the backstory, use these cards and this book and this deck as like a way to find, like almost like your Google search, like a way to find the goddess that you're interested in. And then you can go, there are plenty other more qualified places for you to go and learn about the mythology about them. This is just my feeling into the energy of the goddess. So in the most basic form, because oracle decks are always supposed to be kind of a little more simple and basic. So I've simplified the goddesses down to a couple qualities. And then in the descriptions for each goddess, I've also kind of playfully tied in their modern counterpart into the description. So if I were to take, let's see,
who are some of the 90s icons that you've thrown into the deck?
So we have Clarissa Explains It All, which was a 90s Nickelodeon show. And she plays the goddess. Oh, I'm going to butcher this name. That's the other thing. I always tell people I'm a reader, not an audio person. And so I feel really bad that I do mispronounce a lot of these goddesses, but it's because I always learn things by reading. And so sometimes it doesn't
I do everything by audio, so that's why I don't have to figure out all the words. Someone else makes them for me. So
there you go. So let's see. Nimozine is my best stab at this goddess name, but she is the goddess of memory and storytelling. And so Clarissa Explains It All. The entire concept of that show is she's this preteen that's kind of telling you about life in this like shooting straight from the hip sort of way. And so when you're trying to explain things, you have to have a good memory. You have to be able to like document things in your life. And so she's kind of my interpretation of the goddess of memory, because that's kind of what she was doing in that show. And so then they have Ocean is a very popular goddess that a lot of new age spiritual people work with. And actually I believe Oshun, I think is how her name is pronounced, but she is kind of similar to Venus, but she's got a little more earthy, sensual, little more powerful quality to her. No shade to Venus, but she is about sexuality and abundance and money making. So a lot of people will use her for calling in money rituals. And so she's played by Lauryn Hill, because you can't be you don't want to be a hard rock if you really are a gym. So like the lyrics of Lauryn Hill's Do Up were like half of the interpretation in the card description, because they fit so perfectly with the energy of this goddess of owning your value and owning your worth and letting the world know what your value is.
So actually, if you were reading somebody who was like super 90s oriented, that deck just touches them, because it's like, bam, you're right on it, right?
Absolutely. And like, I mean, honestly, I think, like I said, I like to think of it as like a gateway drug to the goddesses, because if you don't know a lot about the goddesses, and there are some goddesses that I learned about through the process of doing this deck, because I had been really into Greek mythology as a child. And so of course, by default, also knew a lot of the Roman mythology stories. But a lot of the stuff I had to do some more research for. So I kind of got to know the goddesses as I was developing it. And so I like to think of this almost like a gateway drug to the goddesses, because you might just be like, oh, I really like the 90s. Let me get these cards because they're colorful and they remind me of my childhood. And then maybe every time you pull a card, it's the same goddess. And so then all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe I need to look into this goddess more. And then you can go to other resources and you can find out the history of that goddess. You can find out a cultural background. You can find out, rituals and practices, which I always say, like, be respectful if you're going to go into the rituals and practices area of the goddesses. Be mindful of the original culture and like whether or not you think that you should be taking that over. But the goddesses themselves are for everyone. So the rituals can be maybe more specific to different cultures, but the energy of the divine is available to anyone who wants it. And
Can
so the
people buy
cards are
these from
there.
you?
They absolutely can. Yeah. They're
Yeah.
available on
Okay.
my website, michelleshayewalker.com. And I'm actually currently in the process of having a pre-order available because I'm making a second edition. So I have only about 14 copies left of this edition that we've talked about. This is 44 cards. It's got the old school composition notebook for the backing.
I
It's
love
got
that.
the coloring guidebook that comes with it. But then I started feeling out what it was that the people that were purchasing from me needed. And I realized that the coloring guidebook was fun, but a lot of people didn't feel like they needed it. So I redid the deck so that this new edition is going to have a mini guidebook that's inside.
Oh,
It's not a coloring guidebook anymore, but it does have color images of the goddesses inside of it. And then I completely redid the packaging because at the time that I did the deck, I was still kind of learning my own artistic skills. And so I did the best of my ability to create this little composition notebook. And it's still bright and colorful, and I'm still super proud of it. But my skills developed much further as I did the
mm,
entire deck. And then I also did some other art projects afterward. And so the new deck is now like an ode to my 90s obsession with taping VHSs of all of my favorite shows. I had a little double decker VCR set up in my childhood bedroom, and I would tape shows like with a timer. So I would be out doing my like after school activities, and like I would make sure that they got timed, but then I would double decker edit them so that I could cut out the commercials, and I
oh,
would make my own version of like a box set.
you are totally 90s. Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
So I was like, I want to do an homage to that, to have like sort of the Polaroid blank tape type
Yep.
packaging. And we've got the rainbow on the back as well. And then you open it up and it's got the little pink inside. And then the backs of these cards are
Cool.
VHS tapes.
I love that.
So this one has 48 cards. So I've updated it with two more goddesses, and I'm still in the process of finalizing the printing. So we might add a couple more goddesses in as we go, because I'm definitely trying to find the best printer, both for economical reasons and also environmental reasons. Because currently my printer is in China, and so if I can find a US
Right.
company so that's not quite much shipping and things like that. So all of that's still kind of coming into play, but I do have this deck available to be pre-ordered over on my website as well. So
So
if
they
you're the
can
type of
find you on the website there.
Yes,
But,
michelleshayewalker.com. So yeah,
uh,
so if you're the type of person that likes having the first edition of something, this is the deck for you. It's available. There's only 14 copies left. But if you always like having like the newest iPhone and the newest, most up-to-date version, you can pre-order the copy. And the beautiful thing about pre-orders is they actually are going to get a guarantee. It's kind of like when you pre-order on Amazon, like you pre-ordered a book and they give you the guarantee for the lowest price.
yeah.
I'm doing that same thing. So as I'm like shopping around to different printers and like trying to get these pre-orders in, the more pre-orders I get, the cheaper that I can buy the deck for, because I'll be buying more. And then if I get a cheaper price, everyone
You
who
pass it
pre-ordered got a
along.
cheaper price as well. So yeah.
You gotta love that. So people can also find you on Twitter also, right? And
Yes.
at Michelle Shea.
Yeah. I'm more
And
active on Instagram. So Twitter and Instagram are both at Michelle Shea.
and then what about TikTok? Are you up there also?
Yeah, TikTok, Michelle Shea Tarot, because I was a late joiner and Michelle Shea was already taken. So
Like, okay, I'm just trying to figure out how crazy that is. Like, I don't know that name, but okay, now we got the Walker in there, so that works
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very,
No,
very
we got
cool.
the tarot in there for that one. So it's Michelle Shea
Well,
Tarot. Yeah.
yeah, Michelle Shea Tarot, and
Yeah.
then we've got your website is with
Yes.
the Walker.
Yes,
Very cool.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think this has been fascinating. We could go into like the
I know.
spirituality and the quantum mechanics of spirituality, and we could talk more. We should have you back and do some readings sometimes. Um,
Absolutely. I would love that.
we'll have to figure that one out.
Maybe closer to Halloween.
We'll
I
figure
don't know
that
what you
one
got
out.
planned. Yeah.
I'm gonna talk to Caden about that.
Talk to
We'll
your
see what
people.
happens there. All right. So, thank you so much for coming on. This has just
Yeah,
been absolutely fascinating. I loved the whole explanation of tarot versus oracle. I like 90s thing. Matter of fact, when you started talking about 90s, and it really resonated. It's like, huh, okay, I could see Lauren Hill talking to me and that kind of thing. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
uh,
So if you want a
thank
more
you.
personal relationship with the goddess, you find the deck that resonates with you from your history. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in. And
Yep.
again, we're going to talk about having you back sometime.
Sounds good.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very
having
much,
me.
Michelle. Bye bye.